and welcome to this month's interview in the series Musician Profiles Celebrating Racial Diversity. This is presented by the International Conference of Symphony and Opera Musicians, otherwise known as ICSOM. I'm Doug Rosenthal. I'm the Associate Principal Trombone with the Pittsburgh Symphony, and I'm joined today by Weston Sprott, a trombone player with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. Hi, Weston.
Hey Doug, how's it going?
Pretty good, pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me for this series. Looking forward to the conversation.
Us too. Um, yeah, I'm so glad you could take time out of your busy schedule for this. So before we get down to the questions, tell us about yourself.
Sure. My professional profile these days, as you mentioned, I'm a trombonist in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra. This is my 19th season in the orchestra. In addition to that, I'm Dean and Director of the Preparatory Division at the Juilliard School. So in that capacity, I lead our two youth programs for students between the ages of 8 and 18. One is the pre-college, and the other is the Music Advancement Program. So those are Saturday programs that are providing a full conservatory-style education to students 30 weeks out of the year. So every week these students are coming in, getting a private lesson, music theory, ear training, chamber music, playing in large ensembles, singing in choruses, taking electives, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really robust program with nearly 400 students, better than 170 faculty, I would say. And it's been an incredible part of what I've been doing for the last 5 years. This is my 5th year in that role, and it's been an absolute privilege and honor to be one of the stewards of these programs. And in addition to that, I am one of the co-founders and steering committee members of the Black Orchestral Network, which I'm assuming we'll probably end up getting to this conversation about later on. And beyond that, numerous side projects and various things that we musicians always find ourselves into, playing recitals, chamber music, things like that, in addition to some faculty teaching. I teach here at the pre-college at Juilliard, and I also teach in the summers at Music Academy of the West. So that's the brief summary of what I've been up to recently.
It's amazing. That's amazing. Do you have time to sleep?
Yeah, actually, I do. I actually have to say that both my mental and physical health are pretty good. I put in a quite large number of hours on a weekly basis, but some kind of way I find my way to probably a good 7 hours of sleep every night. So I'm in a good spot.
That's impressive. That's
Yeah.
great. Well, excellent. Well, just, kind of continuing with this biographical side of you, what would you say your earliest musical memory is?
We're all listening to music from the time that we're born, basically. I grew up in the Pentecostal church, so hearing hymn and B3 organ, choir, instruments in the church was a very early memory. My parents were big fans of the R&B, soul, 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s music, so I remember long road trips in the car listening to the Shy Lights, Harold Melvin and the Blue Notes, Jackson 5, Barry White. All of those things were very early musical memories for me. I grew up in Texas. High school football was an enormous thing from the time I could walk. We were going to high school football games on Friday and Saturday nights. And part of high school football is that every high school in Texas also has an enormous army of a marching band. So,
Right.
listening to stand tunes, sitting in the bleachers, and oftentimes we would sit next to the band. I was just kind of enamored just by the aesthetic of the band, both audibly, just what I was listening to, and visually. I think that's probably one of the things that attracted me to playing the trombone, is just seeing the visual of the instrument and how visually cool it seemed like it was to play that instrument. And beyond that, just early music education in Texas, which for us started in elementary school playing the recorder, which at that time didn't seem like something too serious. You're learning how to play hot cross buns or row, row, row your boat on the recorder. But that's the beginning of your brain learning how to process rhythms and math and getting the feeling of what it's like to have a vibration go through your body while you're creating. And so those are in what order all of those things came. It's so distant now, that I can't remember, but that feels like those were the earliest influences. It was that mix up of things.
Wow. And so was the recorder then the first instrument that you played, or did you do piano or anything before that, or?
Recorder is the very first instrument that I played. I never really took piano. And then I started playing the trombone in the sixth grade. That's in Texas, that's when most students start band, is in junior high school with sixth grade. So that was my introduction to the trombone. I decided near the end of my fifth grade year that was the instrument that I was going to play, but band class officially started in sixth grade.
And I assume you did marching band.
I did.
Yeah,
I did.
I
I
did
did.
too. It's
I did. Marching band, especially in the high school that I went to, Klein High School, also where Tim Higgins and I were classmates at that high school.
right.
Marching band was a very serious thing. We had five bands in our program at that high school, if you can believe it. And of those five bands, the top four bands all were required to march. So we had a marching band of somewhere near 300 students, I think, on the field. I would guess it was somewhere between 250 and 300 students. And we were all required to be in the marching band. And so I did that ninth, 10th, and 11th grade. And we marched some serious repertoire. We marched Copland 3, Dvorak 9, Firebird, uh, some
Yeah.
really intense stuff. So it was a really interesting combination of learning how to march, having that reinforcement of rhythm in what you're doing, 8 steps to 5 yards, the whole deal, and then simultaneously being able to play some of the great repertoire, albeit arrangements of the great repertoire. And then I
It's
found
exposure though.
oh, it's great exposure. It's great
Yeah.
exposure because you're in the car on the way to rehearsal listening to the Firebird
hmm
as a 10th grader, and that music is just seared into you. And of course now, you're a professional musician, a major orchestra as well. We actually get a chance to play that repertoire in its original form. But that was great. And then I quit marching band my senior year, actually, to much to the chagrin of the band directors. I found a loophole. I actually wasn't allowed to do it, but I joined the academic decathlon team specifically because I knew it would conflict with marching band. It would give me the chance to get out because at that point I had determined I wanted to be a serious, dedicated musician. I wanted to major in music, and I thought that marching backwards as fast as I can in 90-degree heat wasn't going to help my college auditions. So
I could see that. I could see that. And for those listening who don't know who Tim Higgins is, first of all, shame on you. Second, this is the person that Weston went to high school with. He's now the principal trombonist in the San Francisco Symphony. So you obviously were surrounded by powerhouse folks.
we had a nice
Um,
iron sharpens iron thing going on.
oh, I like it. I like it. So in the marching band, did all of these hits that your parents loved and introduced you to from an early age, did your marching band ever play any of those, or did they keep it pretty classical?
It's pretty straight ahead. It
Okay,
was pretty straight ahead classical repertoire on the field, and then uh, the very traditional stand tunes in the stands.
sure,
So it's
sure,
everything that you would expect.
sure, sure. Um, so then that takes us to the end of high school, and so now it's time to go somewhere else. What was your decision? Who influenced you? Who supported you? Who comes to mind?
I ended up going to Indiana University when I was thinking about where I wanted to go for college. I knew that I wanted to be a music performance major. My parents knew that they weren't excited about me being a music performance major. And so they encouraged me to think about schools that had multiple options, preferably something where I could do a double major in music and something like business. And so that's actually what informed my college choices because I wasn't taking regular private lessons as a high school student. In fact, my first ever weekly private lessons on a real consistent basis started the summer after I graduated high school with Michael Warney, who's the second trombonist in Houston Grand Opera and Ballet. So my college choices were informed by what I saw in U.S. News and World Report. That I'm not even sure if that magazine still gets produced in the same way it was 25 years ago, but at the time, they would you could flip through this magazine and it would show you these are the top 50 ranked music schools in the country. And you could flip 2 pages later and say, these are the top 50 ranked business schools in the country. And I just kind of cross-referenced and I saw, well, Indiana is top 10 in music and business and University of Michigan is top 10 in music and business. So those will be the top 2 schools that I'm going to apply to. And Indiana turned out to be the choice. I went there for a couple of years. I swiftly dropped the business major after my parents had already made the tuition deposit and I had shown up on campus. They weren't happy about it, but I can kind of express past that whole conversation. But needless to say, they weren't happy about it, but they're cool with it now. So I went to
It
Indiana.
worked out.
It worked out. I'm glad it worked out, or otherwise I'd still be hearing about it, I'm sure. But I went to Indiana for 2 years, and then after that, I transferred to the Curtis Institute of Music. Did 3 years there, and graduated from Curtis Institute of Music. During that time, I was playing something with Philadelphia Orchestra and was principal in Delaware Symphony and the Pennsylvania Ballet, which I think is now called Philadelphia Ballet. And then, with great fortune, on the last day of school, I won the position with Metropolitan Opera.
On the last day of school.
It was literally the last Friday of school. Yeah, just had good timing.
Well, that's that's so wonderful. Now I'm thinking between at least your brief intention of studying business and also I forget the name of that club that you joined senior year of high school.
Academic decathlon.
Academic decathlon. That's right. Are skills from either of those things, are those helping you out now at this stage in the game?
Well, if I had actually followed through on them, they would be. Uh, but I didn't. So, my double major at Indiana University lasted all of a week before I decided that's not what I want to do. Um, and at the moment, it seemed very, very liberating to say, well, I'm just going to focus on my music and practice as many hours as I can and all of those things. And in a way, because so many things have worked out quite well, it would be easy to say, well, those were the right choices to make. But the truth of the matter is now, considering all of the various pots that I have my fingers in, whether that's being a dean and director here at Juilliard or helping to start some nonprofit organizations, thinking about the work that I do with Black Orchestral Network, having an understanding of a lot of the things that I would have learned had I gone through a true double degree in business, that would have been incredibly beneficial for me. So what's happened in the interim is that I spent a lot of time going back and being my own best teacher as much as I could be to pick up all those skills that I left on the table. So that required me, following graduation, deciding that I'm going to read a lot about nonprofit management and negotiation and understanding, learning how to be thoughtful about budgeting and interpersonal dynamics and all of those different things. Perhaps it would have been more efficient if I had learned it while I was in school, but you can't get by and try to do the variety of things that I'm trying to do without having some competency in those areas.
Sure. Sure. Um, well, just the fact that you know those things existed, though, at least you knew where to start looking. Um,
Sometimes it works that way, and sometimes you realize there's something that you want to do, and then
mhm,
you reverse engineer what skills you're going to need in order to be able to accomplish that. I think it's much more that than the reverse. And I think it's, in some ways, there's so many parallels to what we do as musicians. It's one of the reasons why I encourage our families in the programs that we have here at Juilliard, why we champion the importance of youth music education, because you're learning skills for life. All the things that we're doing here are transferable. We're learning how to do difficult things. We're learning to do very complicated things that require scaffolding and require sometimes starting with the end in mind. Like you, before we got on this recording here, you were talking about having to prepare something like Also Sprach. You don't necessarily think in advance about all the skills that you need to play Also Sprach. You probably go in a room, you put the music on the stand, you try to play it once, and you go, okay, so I'm gonna have to figure out how to do these 10 things and then revisit this in a few more weeks.
Right,
You
right.
know,
And for those
yeah.
for those who aren't familiar, that we were talking, commiserating maybe about, also Sprach Zarathustra has a couple licks for the trombones that you don't want to just show up and not have ready to go.
Exactly. So you might, you might put it in a different context and say, I really want to start a nonprofit organization that's going to help support students in South Africa. That's a really noble idea. And then you start thinking, wait a second, what all do I need to do? How to actually file to establish a 501c3? Oh, this needs bylaws. I need officers. Who's going to fund it? And then you start pulling on that thread of yarn, and that kind of leads you to the first couple of things that you need to read, which leads you to the next five things that you need to read, which leads you to the next five things, and it keeps going. It's all, there are a lot of parallels there.
Yeah, it's sort of like the video game of the nonprofit world.
That's right.
um, well, so you keep mentioning the Black Orchestral Network. So I would love to discuss that. So first of all, for people who might not know exactly what it is, do you want to describe it to us? And
Sure. The Black Orchestral Network was founded with a mission of cultivating community, lifting our voices, and telling our stories for members of the Black orchestral community and supportive members of the Black orchestral community. And those three pieces, basically what they mean, cultivating community is making sure that the people who are in this community, for one, are aware of one another and they're able to connect with one another, able to support one another, able to have community conversations. Sometimes those happen remotely, sometimes they happen in person, but making sure that there's a connected community. The second part, lifting our voices, is about making sure that our collective spirit and voice is documented and shared with the field at large. That has shown up in our Dear American Orchestras letters. We've written two of those over the course of the last couple of years, basically calling for change in the industry around any number of things, but primarily at this point, our last one was around tenure guidelines. So audition, tenure, hiring practices, the way that we think about what an American orchestra is, what does it mean to be an American orchestra. So that's the lifting our voices piece. And then the last piece is telling our stories, which is making sure that the history of Black orchestral musicians is told and is archived in a meaningful way. So a lot of us black musicians, especially in classical music, the experience that we had in school was when we went to learn about history. Basically, what we were told is that we really didn't have any. When we went to orchestra or chamber music or recitals, things like that, music by people who look like us was not getting programmed. And what we know is that it's not because people who looked like us didn't exist before or didn't exist in this music. In fact, during our conference last October, Federa Hadley, who was on the faculty here at Juilliard, she said something I thought was really well stated. She said, at any point in history, the first thing that you should do when you're thinking about Black people is you should assume that we were there. Assume we were there. And then ask yourself the question, if these people were there, why is their story not showing up in the history that's being told? So trying to make sure that we're capturing that history, and that's largely lived thus far in the form of a podcast called Black Music Scene, which has been really revelatory for a lot of people. It's been inspiring and informational for me. Our first episode was on Ann Hobson Pilot, who for many years was the principal harpist of the Boston Symphony. We went on to talk to Rufus Olivier, who's principal bassoonist of San Francisco Opera and Ballet, and on and on and on. And one of my particular favorites, Booker Rowe, who recently retired after 50 years as a violinist in the Philadelphia Orchestra. Shay Scruggs and I interviewed him just a couple of months ago, and that was particularly meaningful for us because we remembered as students at the Curtis Institute of Music, going to hear the Philadelphia Orchestra every single week and looking down and seeing Booker Row there and thinking, how cool is it? There's this incredibly distinguished black man there on the stage of the Philadelphia Orchestra who's been there for 50 years. It's unbelievable, and we actually got a chance to speak with him and have his story told largely in his own words.
You've had so many different roles with the Black Orchestral Network. Um, is there anything in particular right now in this moment in time that you would like to amplify in this interview about the organization and just, really have everyone be aware?
Going back to just a couple things that I shared just now, I think I would encourage people to go and listen to some episodes of Black Music Scene. It's really, really well done. The production quality is incredibly high. David Norville, who has been taking the lead on that avenue of our work, is just, he's phenomenal at what he does, and it's a joy to listen to. So you're in the car on your way to work, you're at the treadmill, and you got your headphones in. Just take a listen. You'll learn something. You'll be inspired. These are amazing stories. And then the second part is these Dear American Orchestra's letters that we wrote. I encourage everyone who's listening to this to just actually take the time to read them. They're so thoughtfully crafted that almost every issue that has come up in classical music, and as you know, there are a lot of things going on right now in classical music, a lot of discussions. A lot of the guidance and the answers are in those letters. So oftentimes we talk to people and they say, well, I wish I knew what to do, or what do you think we should do? And 9 times out of 10, I can go back to those letters and say, you know what, the next good steps are already outlined here. So, they're really great documents for thinking about how we want to take action. Sometimes the answers we're looking for are right in front of our face, and I'm convinced that a large percentage of those answers already live in those letters.
And where, I mean, they're all over the place right now, but where is the best place, do you think, to go read these letters? Just
go to our website, blackorchestralnetwork.org.
I also wanted to speak to you. By the way, are you at Juilliard right now? Is this your office?
I'm in my office at Juilliard. That's right.
Awesome. Yeah. So for those who don't know about the Juilliard Music Advancement Program, well, I guess you spoke to it a lot in the intro, but and is there anything further you want to describe about it?
Sure. I'll just say, Music Advancement Program, we're currently serving 87 students in that program. The program is one that actively seeks to serve students who are historically underrepresented, underserved in classical music. We are in our 32nd year, I believe, of the program. The program was begun as a response to New York City Department of Education really limiting the amount of music education that was available in public schools, to make sure there was still access and opportunity for underserved populations to be able to pursue higher artistic levels. So that's what we're doing here. I'm really excited about where the program is now. We've recently moved to a tuition-free model thanks to just incredible transformational giving. So we're able to create an environment where students are able to come in and learn for free, and that the intention and the support suggests that that's going to be the case in perpetuity, which is something that we're all grateful and proud of. There's an immeasurable number of adjectives that we could associate with how we feel about how wonderful all of that is. And in addition,
to interrupt you, but if someone wanted to chip in, where can someone do that?
Oh, go to juilliard.edu and you'll find places where you can click to support our
Great.
programs.
Is there anything, any drop-down menu that we should be aware of specifically for this program?
I'll have to link you to it. So
okay.
maybe if there's
Sorry,
a way
I didn't mean to turn
to
this into a gotcha question.
No, that's okay. If there's a way to link to it later, we can definitely do that.
That'd be great.
That's no problem. But we're really proud of what's happening with our programs, both from an accessibility standpoint and from an artistic perspective. So each year, both in pre-college and the music advancement program, our observation is that the level of artistry keeps getting higher and higher and higher, which for people like you and me is great because that means, we already have our job, which is good because I can tell you the next wave of students that are coming are incredibly impressive as people and as artists. And I'm excited about the fact that we're able to change the frame of the way that they're educated and the things that they're thinking about. So, as an example, I was talking earlier about how when I was a student in college, that we were not being told anything about the history of Black composers. That wasn't something that we were aware of. It wasn't showing up in our orchestral programming. It wasn't showing up in the recital programming. That's not going to be the case for any of the students who are graduating from pre-college and music advancement program. Every large ensemble concert that we play includes female or BIPOC composers. We have commissioned well over 50 pieces just in the last couple of years, almost exclusively from BIPOC female composers as well. That includes etudes for every instrument, solos for every instrument, chamber pieces, wind ensemble, full orchestra, you name it. And we have a permanent endowment for commissioning moving forward. We just actually had our first recital of that on April 20th, so I guess 3 weeks ago, with new works for trumpet, trombone, bass trombone, horn, brass quintet, so on and so forth. We had an orchestral premiere just a couple of weeks ago, and that's going to happen every year in perpetuity to the tune of probably eight to 12 new works every year forever. So we're in the process of building a more inclusive repertoire for young musicians. That's going to have a long-lasting ripple effect. So,
that's awesome. And are these recitals, were they recorded? Can we watch them somewhere online?
These recitals were recorded largely for archival purposes, but they were all live streamed. But we do, if you go to juilliard.edu and scroll down to preparatory division, we have a commissioning page. So all the pieces that we've commissioned are listed there, and you can see the composer, the title, in the case of the pieces that have already been published, a link to where you can buy the piece, things like that. And one of the steps we're going to have moving forward is hopefully being able to get recordings that are accessible to these works so that everyone can not only see where to buy it, but also can go, this is what it sounds like. So that's coming.
That's great. That's great. Is there anything else from this program that you want the orchestra world to be paying attention to? I mean, you've already said a lot.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the just the frame of what it is, one of the things that we have going on here is that in the music advancement program, Anthony McGill, who is the principal clarinetist of the New York Philharmonic, is artistic director of the music advancement program. In my role in dean and director, as we mentioned, I'm also a trombonist in the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, and I think there's something really valuable about people who are playing at a very high level, which is going to be a lot of the people who are listening to this interview, people in ICSOM orchestras, for example. Having a commitment to the next generation of musicians. And that's going to look different at every school. It's going to look a little bit different in every community, but just the idea that those of us who do should teach and should invest in people who are younger than us in whatever way you possibly can do wherever you are. You take someone like Anthony McGill, who's one of my closest friends, but is also someone I admire for all that he's doing. He doesn't have to be doing this, but he knows that it's important, that there's value, and that also there's symbolism, and that when a young person with an instrument, whether it's a clarinet or a trumpet or a composition major or something, a 12-year-old student who's got that spark and a lot of energy for learning to become a musician, they say, hey, the principal clarinet player of the New York Philharmonic is willing to be here and hang out with me at 8:30 in the morning on Saturday. Maybe that says something about what I'm doing is special, or it's worthwhile, or it's important, or that gives me some confidence to keep going and doing what I'm doing. That's really valuable. And if there was if I'm not saying there are not people all over the country that are not already doing that, because I know there are. But even if this conversation results in a handful more people who were kind of on the fence or thought they were too busy or whatever, deciding, you know what, that's really important, that would be a win.
Well, I'm sure you, Anthony, so many people at the program are just so inspiring to these students. So,
Yeah, we have an amazing faculty, and a lot of our faculty do play in the Lincoln Center orchestras. And if you ask them, I'm sure a lot of them would tell you that their time spent here on Saturdays is the most joyful part of their week. So,
wow.
spread that joy. My experience in music is that the younger the cohort, the more joy you see, and it's one of the things that we have to work on as adult musicians. You know, we should be thinking about, why is that the case? You walk into a classroom of 12 and 13-year-olds playing music, and you experience a certain level of joy that it's very difficult to find in a room of 40 and 50-year-olds. And what is it about what we do to ourselves as professionals, or how we treat one another, that leads to that chipping away of our joy? And one of the things we try to instill in our students here, one of the frameworks, is how do you take a student who's 14, 15, 16 years old, whatever it is, and help them to develop the musical maturity of someone who's 40 while helping them retain the joy of someone who's 15? And what would it be like for us as professional musicians? I'm 41 years old, to be able to think, okay, I have all these skills, I have all this knowledge, I've played God knows how many long tones and lip slurs and etudes, etc. Now, how can I reach back and think about, for example, when I was playing Guys and Dolls in the Pit in high school with Tim Higgins, the sheer amount of joy that came in that moment. How can I carry that forward into my work now? And what does that look like? What does that look like for me, for my colleagues who are immediately surrounding me? And I'm sure some of that energy can also permeate the audience.
That's so beautiful. I mean, my mom was in early childhood education for her career, and I don't know, all these things you're saying, they really resonate with me too. Keeping that
Yeah,
childlike wonder, and that's
you
so
got to fight.
beautiful.
You got to fight for it.
It's been a joy speaking with you. I'm a chatterbox, so I could keep going for another couple hours, but I think ICSOM probably wants us to
Sure.
start winding down. But before we go, just a couple quick fire questions. Um, so the first question I have for you is, which work by a Black classical music composer, would you like to see premiered or programmed more often?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily premiered, because most of our works have been premiered. It's also one interesting note before I get to the direct answer to your question, is that following or in the midst of this reckoning on racial justice, which also impacted classical music, a lot of orchestras came out and they played various pieces by Black composers. Now we hear the Florence Price symphonies with some more regularity, which should have happened a long time ago. But there are a lot of orchestras that are saying, we're now giving the world premiere of this piece that was written 50, 60 years ago. And I would encourage orchestral leaders to double check their history on that and be sure. Because a lot of times these are not really world premieres. Just because it's the first time a quote unquote major American orchestra has played it does not mean that it was the first time it was ever played. A lot of those pieces were played in churches, on university campuses, things like that. They just weren't given the credit for actually having been premiered. Just because it wasn't done with your major orchestra does not mean it wasn't done. Okay, so that's my
Yeah.
soapbox moment for that.
No, but it's important. I appreciate it. I mean, for all of us who want to do better,
Yeah.
I learned that I probably shouldn't have even thought to use the word premiered. I should have assumed that these works were already premiered.
Yeah,
So
but to answer your question about, well, which works?
yeah,
So
so which work?
I'll actually give you two. One for my trombone geek friends, which I identify as one of those. Obviously, Jeff Scott wrote a piece for us called "Django God of Thunder" for trombone and piano, 8-minute work. It's really really cool. It has some lyrical, it has some technical. It leans on bembe, like these Afro-Latin rhythms. It's a really really fun piece. I did the premiere of it a couple of years ago, or maybe it was last year. I'm forgetting now. I think actually it was maybe November of 2022. I gave the premiere of that. And since then, a couple of my students have been playing it on their senior recitals and having a lot of fun. And then just for the broader orchestral community, William Dawson's Negro Folk Symphony. That's just an amazing piece of music. I think it's an incredible piece of music. It's starting to get played more, but if you haven't heard it yet or you haven't played it, take the time and go and listen to it. And for the orchestras that are beginning to perform this work, I encourage them to perform it, and then a couple seasons later, perform it again, and then a couple seasons later, perform it again. Because with this great music that's been written by Black composers, I think it's important for orchestras to begin to develop a real performance practice around this music. You know, I'm sure the way that Brahms 1 sounds to a lot of people now is not the way that it sounded when it was premiered. But all of these orchestras collectively have probably played this piece 100 times, and there's 100 recordings. And so now we all have a feeling for, of course, that's how Mozart goes. That's how Beethoven is played. That's the way you play Strauss. And I think we owe it to our art form to develop a similar performance practice, that level of sincerity and seriousness about the music of Dawson and Florence Price, for example.
Hmm. And that Dawson piece has great trombone parts, so
It does. That doesn't hurt.
it was a lot of fun when I played it. Yeah. Um, Great. Well, thank you for that. And who is your favorite Black classical music artist, living or deceased?
Boy, that's a tough one. Because there's so many. There's really,
There
really
are,
so many. Um, if I had to
you can
pick
choose a
one,
couple if you want. Or did that make it harder?
you know what? Yeah, yeah. There's one of my favorite sayings is that the people you mention forget immediately, and the ones that you forget to mention remember forever. So I'm
Oh,
gonna pick one and say even though he doesn't really play classical music anymore, Wynton Marsalis,
mm,
because I just think he's one of the absolute greatest musicians of our time. He's currently really committed to championing jazz, but he's also one of the great classical players of this century and of the last century as well. It's just if you go back and listen to those recordings, if I remember correctly, there were 2 years in a row where Wynton won the Grammy for Best Classical and Best Jazz Album in the same year. It's an unbelievable thing, and the amount of talent and the artistry that's there, and then the way that he's leveraged that artistry to do something that's greater than himself is just it's admirable personally, civically, artistically, all the things. So I'll I'll go with that one.
I think that's a good choice. Are there any particular recordings or upcoming performances of his that you would like the listeners to know about in particular?
I think Marsalis Standard Time, that whole series is just fantastic. But I would say actually, and it's not a classical album, but the one that I keep coming back to time and time again is Blood on the Fields.
Hmm.
What an incredible piece of music. It's just an incredible piece of music. It's an oratorio. I believe it won the Pulitzer. So I would encourage people to listen to that. And if you only have time to listen to one track, I would say listen to Back to Basics. It's one of the
Hmm.
greatest tracks ever recorded.
What about that track specifically really speaks to you?
The energy. It's virtuosity, but it's virtuosity that's not just for virtuosity's sake.
Hmm.
It's virtuosity with a deep commitment to artistry, and I'll give you a quick side story. Years ago, Anthony McGill and I were teaching at a music festival in South Africa, Stellenbosch International Chamber Music Festival, and we were at the final student concert. And I think they were playing a Tchaikovsky symphony. I can't remember exactly what it was. And they're young musicians, and you know what it's like to have a youth orchestra concert. There are some things that are not quite as clean as the Pittsburgh Symphony or the Metropolitan Opera would play them, but it's just burning with energy because there's a different level of enthusiasm that comes out of a group when they get to play a concert versus we're doing this concert 4 times this week and we just played 4 last week. And Anthony turned to me at the end of that and he said, you know, if we played with that much energy all the time, we wouldn't have any problem selling tickets. And when I listened to that particular track, the point I was getting to, I feel like that's the combination of that level of virtuosity and just professional refinement joined with that youthful exuberance and just everything is just gushing out of these musicians. It jumps out of the recording.
Well, thank you so much, Weston. Again, I really would love to keep chatting here, but really, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. Really, just the whole gamut of your career, and it's exciting to see all these things happening, and also it's what's going to happen next. It's
Absolutely.
and thank you, listener, watcher, for watching. So this concludes this month's interview for ICSOM's Musician Profiles Celebrating Diversity. And Weston, before we go, if there's anything you would like to amplify, anything you'd like to clarify, I would just love to give you the last word.
Sure. I would just encourage people who are watching this to be active and to be optimistic. A lot of us have great ideas. I know that because I hang out with a lot of musicians. We're at a restaurant or a bar after a show and we're thinking about all the different things we should be doing that could make something better. Take the next step and try to actually do it. And try your best to be optimistic, even though there's a lot of reasons oftentimes not to be. One of my great personal challenges is to find a way to be optimistic but not naive, because pessimism oftentimes leads to inaction and optimism leads to us actually trying to do something. So I'm a fierce defender of my own sense of optimism, and that's what I feel like leads me to actually trying to take some ideas and some thoughts and inspiration and see if we can actually move it into action. So if that resonates with anybody, that would be great.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Weston.